Have you ever stumbled across one of those old, haunting Victorian photographs and just felt a chill? Well, today we're diving deep into that world. We're going to unpack the story behind Victorian post-mortem photography. And I promise you, what seems unsettling at first glance is actually a really profound, really human story about life, love, and loss. So, let's get into it. So when you look at one of these images, what's your first reaction? Is it the stillness? Maybe a little bit of sadness? It's a question that really gets to the core of this whole thing. Were these families trying to capture a moment of death? Or were they desperately trying to hold on to one last beautiful image of life? Yeah, that's what we're here for, to get past that initial shock and really understand the story behind these photographs. The culture, the craftsmanship, and the incredible emotional weight they carried for the people who commissioned them. Okay, so to really get why these photos even exist, we have to start by clearing up some of the biggest myths that have swirled around them for years. This isn't just about looking at spooky old pictures. It's about trying to understand a completely different way of dealing with grief. This is the big one, isn't it? The idea that's all over the internet, that photographers would just prop up the deceased standing on their own, as if they were still alive. It's a really dramatic image, and it's fueled tons of ghost stories. But is it actually true? Well, the reality is way more poignant than the myth. The goal was never some kind of macabre puppet show, not at all. It was about creating one last beautiful memory. The deceased reposed so respectfully, usually to look like they were just in a peaceful sleep, and they were supported by hidden stands and props, not just, stood up like statues. So, you might be asking, why did this whole practice even exist in the first place? To get the photos, you have to get the Victorians. And for them, death wasn't this taboo subject that we hide away in hospitals. It was right there, a visible and ever-present part of everyday life. And this idea is perfectly captured by this Latin phrase, memento mori. It means, remember you must die. Now, for the Victorians, this wasn't some morbid obsession. It was a philosophical, even religious acceptance of mortality. Acknowledging death was a way to appreciate life and to prepare for what comes next. And in a way, these photographs were the ultimate memento mori. And then there's this statistic, a number that changes everything. In some parts of the Victorian era, the child mortality rate was as high as 40%. Just let that sink in for a second. Losing a child wasn't a rare tragedy. It was a devastatingly common one. And for so many of these children, a postmortem photograph would be the only picture the family would ever have of them. See, grief wasn't a private thing you dealt with on your own. It was a very public, highly structured ritual. You had strict mourning dress codes, these long periods of public grief. Death itself usually happened right there in the home. So hiring a photographer to take a portrait, that was a totally natural part of these very open rituals of remembrance. Which brings us to the craft itself. I mean, these photographers weren't just button pushers. They were artists, and they were taking part in a really delicate and emotional process. To create one of these portraits successfully, you needed immense skill, a lot of sensitivity, and a real artistic eye. So how'd they do it? Well, the whole process was meticulous. First, they would gently pose the person to look like they were resting or sleeping. Those hidden stands we talked about, they weren't sinister at all. They just provided support. And the final magic often happened after the photo was taken. Photographers would hand tint the cheeks with a bit of rosy color, or even delicately paint open eyes onto the photograph to really enhance that illusion of life. And this really is the key. These photos were never meant to be scary or shocking. The entire point was to create a portrait of remembrance, a dignified, beautiful, lasting image that a family could hold on to and cherish forever. So we've got the context, we've got the craft. But what was the real purpose? I mean, what did these photos actually do for the families who had them? The answer is pretty simple. They provided a tangible, lasting connection to the person they had just lost. It's a really interesting question to ask ourselves, right? Today, we've got thousands of photos just on our phones that we barely look at. But just try to imagine a time when photography was brand new, it was expensive, it was rare. What would be the value of having just one perfectly composed image of someone you loved more than anything? For these families, a single photograph was everything. It was often the only visual record they would ever have of that person. It was a source of comfort, something physical you could hold on to when memories started to fade, And in the end, it became a priceless family heirloom, a crucial piece of their family story that made sure that person was never, ever truly forgotten. All right, let's fast forward to today. If these photos were so meaningful and so normal for the Victorians, why do we in the 21st century often find them so unsettling? The answer really is all about how much our world and our views have changed. When you see it laid out like this, it all just clicks, doesn't it? Victorian grief was public. Our grief is often intensely private. They faced death at home, we've medicalized it and sent it behind closed doors. And maybe the biggest shift of all, their photos were precious, permanent objects, while ours are everywhere and often feel totally disposable. Our discomfort doesn't really come from the images themselves, but from how completely our relationship with death and memory has been transformed. And this brings up a really important final thought. As we look at these images online today, it's worth remembering what they actually were: intensely private, intimate moments of a family's grief. Looking at them now, we kind of have a responsibility to be respectful of that original purpose and of the families they belong to. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Maybe it's a deeper appreciation for that universal human need to remember and the need to grieve. These grave faces from a time long past are this incredibly powerful reminder of the enduring power of a photograph to capture a memory, and in its own small way, to help it transcend death itself.